Um, Hello, everyone. How's it going? Woo. Uh, I am sure all the adrenaline and the excitement and the nervousness about the awards is coming to a head, but this is going to be a wonderful chat. So stay with us here. It's my pleasure to introduce Dave Weinstein, our Associate Dean for External Education and Mobilization. Dave has been a serial entrepreneur, and I would also say an entrepreneur. He built a very thriving executive education organization over at the Graduate School of Business, and then came over to the Doerr School of Sustainability to do the same. And amongst other things, has been a tireless advocate of thinking beyond just technology solutions to include the arts and humanities for sustainability. Over to you, Dave, to introduce Sarah and
Thank you. Thank you, Pro. Can everybody hear me? My mic's working, I think. Cool. Cool. Well, it's my pleasure to be here and to introduce Dean Sarah Sewell today. Sarah is the Philip Knight Professor and 14th Dean at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, as well as the Morgridge Professor for Organizational Behavior. This year is the centennial anniversary of the GSB, and Sarah represents the first female dean in the 100-year history of the GSB. And she's been at the GSB about 17 years now, right? She got her PhD in sociology from Cornell and has focused her work in three areas: organizational theory, social movements, and political sociology. And we're here today really to talk about her work in social movements. She's the author of two books, one on contention and corporate responsibility, and the other a primer on social movements. And her social movement research is really focused on two questions. How do social movements impact organizations? And how might we apply organizational theories to better understand the dynamics and processes within social movements? But in addition to research, Sarah loves teaching. She has the distinction, I think, and she may be the only one who has the distinction of having taught in pretty much every single program that exists at the GSB for every single audience, in person and online. So she's absolutely committed to the teaching mission as much as the research mission. And her courses that she teaches have focused on strategy, organizational design, design thinking, and social movements. She's also a keen observer and teacher of leadership. You know, my favorite quote from Sarah on the subject of leadership, and one that I know firsthand she lives day to day, is the best leaders are not those who stand above others, but those who stand with them. Leaders who listen, engage, and bring people together. That truly is who Sarah is. And one of the reasons it's my pleasure to be here is I had the privilege of working for and with Sarah for 5 years at the GSB. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that she is the best boss that I ever had in my career. So please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you, Dave. I was just winking at Arun when Dave said that. It is really
You're not my boss, Arun, so you
okay. It is such an honor to be here, and I am so delighted that I'll be able to stick around and see the award ceremony as well, because this is, I'm sure, very exciting, and I feel like we are the only thing between you and the award ceremony, but we'll be there for the award ceremony too. And I'll just say a word or two about Dave. Working with Dave when we were at the Graduate School of Business together was some of the best years of my academic and administrative careers. He's a lot of fun. He's very strategic, and he's also incredibly kind and patient. So, Dave, your admiration for me is equaled by mine for you. Thank you. And thank you for welcoming me.
So the reason we're here, as I said, is to talk about Sarah's research on social movements. But it's interesting because Arun this morning talked about this challenge as, in a sense, a nascent movement, a nascent social movement in the area of sustainability. And I think it really brings this topic to light, which is what we're here today, is to talk about what Sarah's research is in social movements and how it connects to the challenges of sustainability. So I'm hopefully going to take about 30 minutes or less between the two of us, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So please be prepared with questions, and at that time, somebody will bring mics around for the questions. But we'll start by just opening up by asking Sarah to take a few minutes to describe her research at a high level and how it connects to the challenges and opportunities that the students in this room face in trying to do more to contribute to a more sustainable future.
Okay, excellent. Never ask an academic to give a high-level overview of their research. That could take at least 42 minutes, but I'll try to be very brief. So, when I was working on my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, I became very, very interested in how, in this case, how social movements, student social movements, can impact what universities decide to do around various kinds of social issues. I joined a lot of folks who are working on similar kinds of research projects at the same time. One of my colleagues, for example, was looking at the recycling movement and how student engagement around recycling years ago, how that impacted what universities were doing. We take this for granted now, that, clearly we look around Stanford, certainly, and we notice that we have a very robust recycling program here and so on. So that was the sort of original thought that I had, like, how can we think about how movements impact organizations? And as I finished that project and then began to work on other projects, I did do several projects that had to do with environmental movement, and in particular thinking about policy change at the state level and at the national level in the United States. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those insights in a minute, because I think there are a few insights, not from my own research, but from the broader literature that will be very useful, I think, to all of you as you think about what it is that you're working on. Because, as we think about the challenges that we have in this moment, yes, tech solutions are going to be a huge part of the change that needs to happen, but there also needs to be changes in human behavior, and there need to be changes in policy as well. So thinking about how you'll be able to build tech that will take into account the needs to change behaviors and also think about changing policy, I think will be really, I hope, useful and maybe inspiring as you build what you're building.
To pick up a theme that you were just mentioning, certainly many of the students in this room and certainly many of the people at the Doerr School are working on powerful technical solutions to climate challenges. But from your perspective, what gets overlooked when we frame the climate change issue as primarily a technological problem?
Yeah. I think fundamentally, right, we should be so proud of what our students and technologists throughout the world are doing to try to figure out solutions to the climate crisis. We have to be very, very proud of that. But if we overlook the need to change behaviors, the need to change hearts, to change minds of people, we are going to likely fail in some of what we could be doing. Even the best tech solutions are going to require that people change, that systems change, that organizations change, and that policies change. And I think that's the danger, because, or at least that's how I see the danger, because it's so, particularly here at Stanford University, particularly amongst brilliant minds like yourselves that have been working in this space, it would be so easy to just say, we fixed everything and there's no problem anymore. And I think that can lead to a couple of things in the sort of words of social psychologists. It can lead to moral licensing. That would be one problem that I would be worried about, right? If we believe that everything that you're building is going to save the world, then it will be very easy for us to say, good, they've fixed that. Or for policymakers to say, no problem, we've got this solved by technology. And so I think that's the danger. So I think figuring out how we can work cross-disciplinarily and bring together insights from the social behavioral sciences to help us to not just create what you're creating, but to figure out how to ease the adoption of what it is that you're creating. And there's so much research that you all can draw on as you think about that.
One of the comments that you made to me when we were talking earlier is that there's a view that the the right information and the right technologies at the right time tend to automatically result in the right behavior. And I'll add to that, we live in a world where there's a perception that the right information and the right technologies and the right policies are the end result. How does your view of social movements, because a lot of social movements are about impacting organizations' behaviors and policy. How do you view social movements as impacting individual behavior at scale?
Yeah, I think that's terrific. It's a great question, and maybe I'll begin by saying that this can happen, and we have lots of evidence that it can happen. And the kinds of studies that people typically look at are things like how might this intervention change how people believe about X or Y. There was a great study that was done by a former professor here at the business school, and he was actually looking at how to reduce phobias of trans people. And so they did this intervention, which they fielded in Los Angeles. And the intervention was essentially an empathy intervention, asking people asking people to tell a story about how they felt when they were felt left out, like on the schoolyard or something like that. And then after asking that question, they would say, this is exactly how trans people often feel. And now, would you like to support this bill to protect trans rights? And what they discovered was not only did that little intervention change opinions, but it was a durable change. They would go back and then they would survey these people months later. And so my point about that is when we can figure out really pointed interventions, often using empathy and the power of taking perspective of other people, we can develop durable change in human behavior and human beliefs. There's other studies that people have looked at that look at things, broadly, public opinion at very broad levels. But it needs to be deliberate, and it needs to be intentional, and it needs to be carried out over time to actually sustain the changes in behaviors. So it can happen. I mean, I think the answer is it can happen, and we have lots of evidence of such things happening. And we often have evidence of backsliding as well. And I think we don't need to, name all of the kinds of ways in which we see that. But, one of the sort of most frequently asked question by many of the public opinion polls is, what's the biggest issue right now facing the world? And it's very interesting to look at how that tracks over time, particularly with respect to issues around environmental sustainability and resources too. And you see years when that is the most important problem, and then you see years when there's backsliding in that belief too. And so thinking about mapping how movement interventions can move the needle on public opinion, I think is very interesting area to look at.
Let's take a step away from sustainability for a moment and focus on some of the past large-scale social movements that have been particularly successful. Which ones would you point to, and what were the key success factors that made those have the impact that they had?
So this is a great one because it's a great one because most often when somebody is asked that question, they point to the civil rights movement in the United States as a big success, because there were, as a result of that movement, so many epic and important policy changes in opinions and beliefs, changes in the structures of schools, and all kinds of changes that movement was in particular trying to drive. And so I'll say that that's one example, but more importantly, I'll talk about the factors that seem to, not just across the civil rights movement, but seem to, in the literature, point towards successful outcomes. And I'll begin with something that may be obvious, but I think is worth saying. Resources are incredibly important. And typically when we talk about resources that are necessary for social movements, yes, it's funding, of course, but it's also human skills and social skills. So learning how to run a meeting, learning how to lobby, learning how to develop the kinds of skills necessary to try to get whatever system it is that you're trying to change. That's another type of resource. Sometimes we talk about resources as simple as a space to meet, or or somebody who is willing to actually, somebody in the elite position is willing to step up and vouch for the movement. So one piece is resources. A second is, and I think this is really important to think about when we think about policy and we think about politics, and that is sort of what's loosely known as the political opportunity structure. And that's nothing more than sometimes the polity is more or less open to the claims of a social movement. So it could be that there are allies in power, people who are, if we're thinking about sustainability, people who are known to vote in favor of good conservation policies and so on. So it could be that. It also could be that there's a lack of repression. That's another thing that people often look at in this literature. And that means that when people go out in the streets to protest something that they don't like, they are not repressed heavily by police and by agents of the state. And another sort of element that's often talked about is the sort of way in which sometimes when the elite is divided on different issues, there's an opening that can be exploited for getting some policies and so on through. So that's another sort of, there's resources, and then there's this openness in the political opportunity structure. Another factor that's often pointed at is sort of the way in which the movement is able to win the hearts and minds of people. And typically what we think about there is the ability of movement and movement leaders to frame an issue in a way that resonates deeply with their beliefs. And so one of the things that I think many movements struggle with is the inability to do that. And oftentimes, particularly scientific movements, double down on the science and lose people's hearts and minds because they either don't understand it or they see it as, not as relevant as a story might be, for example. So, framing is another piece of that. So those are some of the factors that we typically look at. And I think with the civil rights movement, there was a way in which they were able to hit all of that. They were able to mobilize a lot of resources, both in terms of funding, but also in terms of the network, for example, of the Black churches throughout the South and the student network throughout not just the South, but the North and the South. They were able to leverage people who were trained in the Black church to be able to run movements effectively. And so resources were important. There was also a time in which the opportunity structure was open in the United States, to not just for the civil rights movement, but for movements that were born out of the civil rights movement, so animal rights, for example, and, thinking about the wave of feminism that came out of that movement as well, all framed with this issue of rights. So they had this very important framing, which resonated deeply at that time, especially with the American people. Framing what was going on in terms of inalienable rights was something that was quite resonant.
I think this also relates to an earlier comment that you made. We tend to live in a world of techno-optimism. And how does techno-optimism interact with the ability to sustain social movements?
Yes, I mean, I think there's so much to be optimistic about. Like this day, there's so many great things that that you all are building and trying to build and thinking about building. And I think the danger, though, of that, and I sort of referred to this before, I think there are two dangers. One is that people will see all of these great things that are being built and say, oh, good, I don't have to do anything. I'm going to stop recycling, and I'm going to go fly my jet all over the world, and I'm going to drive my big gas guzzling car and not think about not think about fossil fuels at all and so on. I think that's one of the dangers, is that we, sort of socially will just give up and say, good, they've solved this. And related is really that if policymakers think that all of the solutions are there, just a matter of, somebody figuring out how to adopt them, then there will be, less of an urgency to act. And I think those are the two things that worry me the most, even though I tend to be, I live here at Stanford and I live here in Silicon Valley, and I tend to be quite easily swayed by all of the wonderful advances in technology that are happening. And I think that's great, but I think we do need to worry that that will lead to moral licensing and social loafing and diffusion of responsibility on the part of policymakers.
You began to mention this, and I want to come back to it. This notion of communications and how communications can either help or hinder a social movement. As you mentioned in the climate area, the communications tends to be fairly data heavy. It focuses on facts and figures. It also tends to be disproportionately doom and gloom. How do social movement research teach us about framing communications, and how would you contrast, for instance, in the case of civil rights, why was that communication and what we saw and what we experienced effective, and versus what we're seeing and experiencing in the climate and the sustainability area?
Yeah, so typically, I think effective framing and communication of a social movement's goals, and again, this has been shown in research, do a few things. First, they sort of name exactly precisely what the problem is in very plain language. And sometimes that means, particularly for people who are who tend to speak in the language of science, sometimes that means you've got to figure out how to say something very, very simply and name the problem very, very clearly. The second thing that effective framing does is that it places blame on somebody. So it says, this is, here's the problem, and here's why we have this problem. Maybe not on somebody, but on something or some set of factors. Here's why we have this problem. And then the third thing that the effective frames typically do is provide a call to action with clear sort of instructions on what needs to be done. And so it's a what, so what, now what kind of framing that tends to be shown in the literature to be most effective. And so being able to clearly name what the problem is so that people understand it and that it hits them and they feel it. And then to very, very clearly explain what the root causes of the problems are, and then to motivate people with a call to action that ideally, explains or shows what the future world will look like if the movement is successful. That's why I like to say, what, so what, now what?
Do you have any, I tend to think about this communication also in terms of the visuals that you see, and it seems like, certainly during the civil rights movement, I was old enough to remember the visuals that we were seeing in the southern part of the United States of people trying to get into schools and the violence that was deeply engaging. I think I've seen in the climate area, people experiment with lots of fairly compelling visuals. Polar bears that don't have homes. You can start to name all these things that you've seen. But it doesn't seem to have garnered the hearts and minds in the same way. You have any sense of why that is?
It's very interesting. I mean, I think I have a couple of thoughts on it, and I want to talk about this project that we did recently. It hasn't been published yet, but one of the things that we were trying to do was examine sort of a willingness for people to act on behalf of an issue. And we were doing this in an online survey, and the issues were, we were looking at a couple of things. One was we started with sort of the issue of sweatshop labor. And what we wanted to understand was how might a news article about an incident get people to, and the measure was give some of the subject fee that they were being paid, donate it back to the United Students Against Sweatshops. And the other sort of metric that we had was, will you voluntarily write a letter to your congressperson about this issue? And then we would count up the number of words and so on. And one of the things that we found, which was really interesting in this study, is that, and then the second issue that we did was about deforestation. And it was really interesting because we found that the images and the language around the sort of victims of sweatshop labor did get people, it did mobilize people. But around deforestation, people didn't, they wrote much shorter letters. They gave less of their money to the, to the organization and so on. And I puzzled over this for a really long time, and I wasn't really sure why. And when I presented the findings from this paper, oftentimes the audience member says it's because, at least in that particular case, it's easier and more compelling to feel affinity to a human victim than it is to deforestation, even if you, of course, think of what, that there will, of course, be human effects down the line. And so, I mean, we haven't gone back and started to sort of play around with that experiment, mostly because I took this job and I haven't had time to think about it. But I think that part of it may be the need to connect it to humans and life and loss of human life in a more compelling way. And I know some elements of the climate change movement absolutely do that, but to think about that as a possible lever might be helpful.
Interesting. I mean, we certainly obviously experimented with everything from Smokey the Bear to the Lorax who speaks for the trees, and it's doesn't seem to have humanized it nearly enough. Climate change, requires coordinated action. Governments, companies, individuals. What does your research in social movements teach us about trying to mobilizing power and sustaining coordination over time across a more complex ecosystem of change agents?
Yeah. There's just a lot of great research on exactly this question, looking at, issues of like burnout. Activists get burned out pretty quickly, right? So how do we make sure, how do we sustain a movement when there are high rates of burnout? There's often not a lot of immediate success. How do we get new people to join the movement and renewal to get people, incentivized to want to join the movement? And I think some of the movements that have done this best do a few things. First, they try for some small wins really quickly. And it's important to show that action is efficacious for people to want to continue to join a movement. So one strategy is to go for something small, get the win, tell the story of the win, and inspire other people. So that's one piece of it. Another piece has to do with identity. Some people are sort of, already at the point where they have identified as a climate change activist, and they are, that's their identity. But a lot of people maybe, they're sort of pro-sustainability, but they haven't yet begun to identify as somebody who's active in the movement. So figuring out how to pull those people in and using the resources one has to target the people who may be sort of amenable anyway to thinking about themselves, and then getting them into the movement, and then trying to reinforce that identity as somebody who is active around this issue is another thing that seems to have shown to be successful in bringing new people into the movement. I think the last thing, and this, I sort of think of it almost as a funnel. There's a lot of people out there that we might be able to mobilize for any movement, but we really do have to use our resources very judiciously to get the ones that are most likely to be pulled into whatever change we're trying to make. And I think sometimes movements forget that. They waste a lot of money just broadcasting a lot of information, and they don't sort of engage in your field of expertise in terms of thinking about segmentation, thinking about who it is that we really should be targeting, and effectively doing that. And I think they'd be better served if they could learn something from the field of marketing science.
I'm going to change gears for a second and ask you a question as the dean of the business school, as opposed to researcher in social movements. As the dean of the, I will say, since I'm an alum, the preeminent business school in the world, how do you see the role of a business school in advancing both the importance of and progress towards sustainability?
I think this is terrific, and it's fortuitous because next week we're going to announce at the business school a new institute, which is the Stanford Leadership Institute. And the way we're setting this up, so if people had been following what was going on for many years, this has gone through several iterations as initiatives and so on. And next week, this is you're hearing it first. There will be an announcement next week, and we will officially launch April 15th with an event. but the way we are thinking about this, and for those of you who know anything about the Stanford Graduate School of Business, you probably know that we're known for many things, not surprisingly, entrepreneurship, not surprisingly, probably thinking about social innovation, not surprisingly, actually investing as well. But another thing we're known for is leadership. But the way most people who think about leadership at the business school think about the personal side of leadership. How can we train people to be very self-aware? How can we train people in the art of perspective taking? How can we train people to lead good teams and to be compelling communicators? How can we train people to make effective decisions and to pull in a lot of different viewpoints with any decision we're about to take, the sort of personal side of leadership. But I have argued for a very long time that part of our secret sauce as a business school is that we are a deeply disciplinary and interdisciplinary business school across both social sciences, but also across sort of technology and engineering as well. And what that's led us to is this way in which we also train leaders to be incredibly astute about the environment in which they're leading. Now, that can be the immediate environment of the organizational culture, but it also means the sort of changes and forces in the external world that deeply impact businesses. One of those, of course, not surprisingly, is environment and climate. But we can also think about geopolitics. We can think about immigration, migration. We can think about culture and society. All of the sort of, if you can imagine a leader nested inside concentric circles, with those circles being the forces that they need to be aware of. Because we're such a disciplinary business school and also interdisciplinary, our students and people who come for both degree and non-degree programs, whether they like it or not, become really good at reading the system in which they are embedded and in which they will be leading. And one major force there is environmental resources, climate change, and sustainability. And that will be one of the major foci of the Stanford Leadership Institute. And so, as you know, we have a great collaboration with the Doerr School, and that will be part of and embedded in our Stanford Leadership Institute as well. So that's, I think, one of the ways that we like to think about that is that as we build this institute at the business school, we will have courses, we will have convenings, we will have research projects around all of those forces, one of which, very importantly, is environmental sustainability and environmental resources. So I think we have a big role to play, in short.
My last question before I open it up to everybody else is, what advice do you have for the students in this room to maximize their personal impact on the planet's future?
So first of all, congratulations, and I'm in awe of what it is that you all are building. And my only advice to you is to make sure that you do try to think in a sort of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary way. The kinds of issues and problems that we have right now in the world are not going to be solved within a silo. And while you may think of yourself as being interdisciplinary because you are bridging across other technological fields and so on, don't forget the social and behavioral sciences, because fundamentally climate change is going to require that we change behavior and we change humans. And even the best epic solutions that you all will be building won't work if nobody uses them. So I would beg you to make sure you think in interdisciplinary ways.
Okay, so with that, I will open the floor up to anybody who has questions. If you have one, raise your hand and somebody will bring a mic to you.
Okay.
And when you start, please introduce yourself.
Great, thanks so much. This was super inspiring. My name is Benji. I'm a student at Columbia University. So my question is about you in your role as the dean. I think you talk a lot about social mobilization. There are powerful forces in the world, meaning great salaries, that pull a lot of excellent young people into what some people call the Bermuda Triangle of talent: finance, corporate law, and consulting. you can pick you can have your own thoughts on all of those. I'm curious, how you feel now steering this institution about helping guide very talented people, young people within your cohort, to go into careers that are making impact as opposed to just money. And I would love to also hear those thoughts on that from the Doerr School perspective as well.
Great. All right, I'll start, or do you want to start? Okay. A couple of things. I mean, we are so blessed at our business school to have a Center for Social Innovation. And that center has a number of programs actually designed precisely for what you're talking about, Benji. So we have a fellowship, for example, competitive fellowship for students who are very interested in being in either nonprofit or social entrepreneurial ventures, but impact ventures, and we support them for a year after they have finished their business school, after they've graduated, so they can work on that venture, they can do this sort of work. So that's one example of what we are able to offer through the Center for Social Innovation to help with that. I think the other very, very popular program that we have is a certificate in social innovation and public nonprofit management that we couple with a board fellows, nonprofit board fellows program for students to be observers in nonprofit boards. And we hope also to therefore get inspired by what is going on in the nonprofit space so that they will down the road or right out be able to contribute in impactful ways. So that's a few sort of ways in which we're trying to tackle this exact question. And I think it's been a draw because we do get a lot of impact focused applicants, incredibly talented people who want to come to business school to get the business skills so that they can have impact in other sectors.
I think and Arun, feel free to chime in on this one, but I think that the Doerr School is easy here. The contrast between the motivation of the people that are associated with the Doerr School, whether they're students, faculty, whatever they are, in contrast to the world I lived in before at the business school, couldn't be more stark. There's nobody at the Doerr School who is there for any other reason other than to impact this future that we face on our planet. A story that I like to tell is, I had this unique seat in running executive education, which is channeling faculty to teach to non-Stanford students. And it was, I'd say, I was at least a year into my stay at the Doerr School before I ever had a faculty member ask me if they would get paid or what they would get paid for teaching in any of these programs. Because their motivation was, give me an audience and give me the opportunity to educate them and to change how they view things or how they behave, and I'll take it regardless. So it is inspiring to be at a place like the Doerr School for this very reason, because that's what everybody wakes up every morning believing that they're there to do. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Ron?
So I have spoken to many undergraduates and graduate students out here. They're very keen on learning about the issues related to sustainability, whether it's energy, climate, food, water, all of them, earth systems. But they're concerned about the career path. And so one of the things we're doing is to now create a career center. And the whole idea is to get people, and this is for all Stanford students, undergraduate and graduate students, to get them jobs. And the way we are thinking about the jobs of the future, given the importance of this issue, is that all jobs will require a mindset of sustainability, of conservation, of the impact on the earth. All jobs, not just in finance and others. And I think with that mindset, this should apply to all Stanford students. So that's what we're putting together, and we'll be partnering, of course, with GSB on this particular issue, and hopefully leveraging the networks that we have across Stanford to place our students.
Next question. I see a hand up over there. Okay.
Sarah and Dave, really appreciate your time today. I'm Nick. I'm from Duke University. Very excited to hear about all the awesome programs you guys have here, because it's very inspiring for someone like me. I want to go a little bit back to the conversation on social movements and sustainability. you mentioned like kind of the second big building block is the political opportunity structure. And like my stomach kind of dropped when you said that, because I was like, I mean, some of the key climate research has recently been struck down that's supporting a lot of the legal structure. And so I don't know. I was wondering if you maybe had any optimistic words about the political opportunity structure here, and like opportunities you see within the United States to sort of like support and push forward this movement.
Thank you. It's a terrific question. And I'll answer it by talking about some sort of iconic work in the world of social movements that is sort of known as thinking about the importance of abeyance and abeyance structures. And the essential sort of line in this research, and the first really sort of kind of the study that really got people quite curious in this was about the U.S. women's movement and the fact that after suffrage was won, the movement kind of disbanded. So people sort of said, "Oh, well, what next? What should we be working on next?" And it sort of went into this sort of trough, if you will. And what ended up happening then during particularly the 40s and 50s was most of the people kind of fled that movement. They got moved on to other things, but there was a core group of people that were engaged in keeping that movement alive through preserving the collective memory of feminism and feminist ideas, of keeping the network strong of a small core group, with this idea that when the political opportunity structure opened again, they would be poised and ready to go for a phase of renewal. And this is sort of the study was used to sort of point out why it was that second wave feminism emerged when it did following the civil rights movement in the United States. And the argument was it was through these close networks of feminists who kept the movement alive, but sort of in an underground sort of way, waiting for the movement to open up. So that's one piece that is sort of interesting and has an optimistic spin. I'll also point out that, and I'm sure everybody in the room is probably aware and has been hearing about various attempts to do this, attempts by scientists to preserve data and to preserve and continue to collect data through citizen science movements and so on. So if certain kinds of data aren't being collected anymore or are being removed from websites and public consumption, to make sure that they are being preserved and held and collected by concerned citizens to keep these going in this interim as well. So it's another form of movement, I guess I will. And I've been certainly hearing a lot about that, particularly in the social sciences space too. So those are a couple of maybe more optimistic takes on what many of us are feeling a little, shall we say, concerned about.
Arun, I know you've spent a fair amount of time in Washington over the course of the last few months. Do you have any insight that would make him feel better about moving at least away from the executive to other parts of the administration? Or? No? Okay. Okay.
There's hope. Okay, good. Okay.
But I think that the principal comment that Sarah made is time. Yes, we're at a moment of time now that is particularly difficult. I think most of us hold on to the belief that moment of time will pass, because this is a real challenge, a real issue, and data shows that most of the population believes that to be the case. And so I think we all want to hold on to the optimism that reality, that most of the population believes these challenges to be real, will win out the day. Next question. Okay.
So just wondering, in the disaster risk reduction space, I notice it seems to be heavily dominated by nonprofits, government organizations, and government contractors. But I feel like there could be more room for the social innovation space in that space. And it's like, I don't know if you have heard anything about that or anything, but I'm just curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not an expert on this, but I do agree with you that oftentimes many of our social entrepreneurs and social innovations come in when there is a gap and a space for this. So I don't know of any offhand at the moment, but it seems like a ripe space for an aspiring entrepreneur in the social innovation space to think of ways in which they can help fill the gaps that exist in the kinds of spaces related to disaster and risk, for sure. I mean, you often hear about ways in which for-profit organizations are quicker and more nimble and are able to get to relief places that need relief quicker. And so I've got to believe that there's some clever people, maybe even in this room, that will work on this topic.
I think a lot of the effort here is something we also often don't see because it is at the community level. Because at the end of the day, resilience starts with the fabric of a community and how a community supports each other. And I think we are seeing a lot of examples of communities coming together to provide the fabric of resiliency that's necessary to respond to disasters. And in a sense, that's the most meaningful structure that one can create because people are connected to each other and care about each other and are helping each other from that perspective, not for any other motivation.
Hi. Thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm Bob, and I'm a third-year medical student here. I'm really interested in the ESG movement as a business concept, and it's been really exciting to see in the last several years that now almost 90% of investors are at least thinking about ESG, if not explicitly using ESG as a measure for how they manage their assets. We're seeing more and more entities, especially in Europe, are sort of giving very public data on various ESG metrics as well. It also, though, seems like recently that movement has slowed down, especially under this administration, and efforts are becoming more and more fragmented. So I'd love to hear from you from a business standpoint. How do we sort of re-energize and re-galvanize the ESG movement from a business standpoint?
Terrific question. I mean, I'll sort of say from my perspective, what I'm seeing, certainly here at Stanford University, are some really interesting academic papers that are working on ways to sort of measure risk, environmental risk, especially to fill gaps when these things are so that companies and frankly, countries will have the kinds of measures that we might need around the environment. It's interesting because one of our we have a lot of incredibly successful and illustrious alums, but one of them is the CEO of MSCI that has created some of the more sophisticated rankings of companies based on ESG kinds of dimensions and so on. And, he was just on campus last week, in fact, talked to Arun, talked to me, talked to a bunch of folks. Still going strong, still, he has said that in fact companies, they're still sharing their data. We're still able to get the kinds of metrics that we have so that they are available for investors and others who are still using them, even if the perception is that this isn't happening. I think it's happening more than we know. So I think that's good too. I think it's partially perhaps what I was saying about abeyance before, in that we maybe this isn't sort of top of mind, and people are not screaming this from every rooftop, but it's still happening, is my belief based on MSCI.
I think there's been a big change in the last couple of years with regard to ESG and sustainability, which is, I think prior to the last couple of years, we lived in a sense, an illusory world or a confused world where we believed that there could be a green premium. And I just don't mean a financial premium, but I mean a behavioral premium, that people would inconvenience themselves or pay more for doing things that helped in the environment. I think the reality now is clearly set in that that's not the case. And what we're finding is investors are now able to truly find opportunities that address sustainability, that don't require a green premium, that have a green premium of zero. And this notion that we now realize that there is no green premium is incredibly helpful in terms of focusing the business on what we need to achieve in various segments. Because before we didn't necessarily hold on to that. Now we know it to be true, and it is incredibly helpful in focusing investments and business strategies. So, I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, thank you. Tika here from Cornell University.
Go Big Red.
Yes, thank you, Sarah and Dave. So we talk about the social movement in the past. So if you were able to make a social movement now or in the future, what would it be?
What topic or what would I do?
Both.
Oh,
And
both.
why?
Okay.
And,
Well,
and I would welcome Dave to answer the question
Okay.
too.
You get to get all these people to do something
I get
that
to
you
do
want them
something.
to
Yes.
do.
Well, see, but given what I said about the importance of segmentation, and for this crowd, that would be to revitalize the sustainability movement. How's that? I know how to segment a market. But I think, I think I would begin by, you would begin by establishing a quick win somehow, somewhere, telling the story in clever ways. You all are young enough to actually know how to do that on TikTok. Maybe you'll teach me how. But this is, leveraging social media in unbelievably, creative ways, relying on the creative sector to help with that, to tell that story, to get people to understand that change is possible, that wins may be small, but they accumulate and can end up being actually really quite large. That's how I would start.
I think we are out of time. Is that? Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah, for this.
You're welcome.
For doing this. And thank you all.
And thank you for the questions, and I can't wait to see the awards.
Okay, now the moment we've all been waiting for. So in a moment here, we'll introduce the finalists who are going to be heading off to Munich this fall, or this spring, sorry. And as we're doing that, we're going to go ahead and bring everybody. Oh, sorry. Oh, great. Well, let me bring Arun back on stage.
Could you start that music again? That was so good. And Eddie, you're going to do that in your graduation. You're going to energize all of Stanford then. Well, this has been fantastic. And Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. And, it just gives me tremendous pleasure and honor to introduce Ann Doerr. It's fair to say that we likely will not have a school of this kind without the blessing and support and engagement of John and Ann Doerr. And we're just blessed to have you in our community with your support. So let's just give a big round of applause to John and Ann. And Ann, what you're seeing now is with that support, you're energizing the world with 91 countries involved. And I think now we're going to have the finals announcement. So let's welcome Ann to come.
I'm so sorry I can't break dance. But you're probably lucky that I can't. Anyway, I'm just thrilled to see you all here today, and those of you in the audience that aren't here. It's so meaningful to see people of your age engaged in this problem and in this fight. It's humbling to me that my generation created it. Some in my generation wish to continue it, and it's difficult. But for you all to step up to the plate, and hopefully this event has allowed you to meet others in which you can form bonds and have a community. It's been a little bit difficult for us for a number of years, but seeing the school come together and the enthusiasm and the cross-discipline, and you heard David and Sarah, it's just been amazing. So I'd like to thank a number of people here. Parul, where did she go? There. And Nida Gupta here, thank you. Dave Weinstein. Dean Arun Manjar. And our president, John Levin. So thank you so much for hosting today. And it's just been so exciting. I must say, I am so thrilled not to have been a judge because, in my opinion, all of you have wonderful, wonderful projects. So thank you for all of that. What my husband and I did when Stanford approached us and wanted to do the School of Sustainability, we've been, of course, involved in Silicon Valley for a long time, and the multidisciplinary way Stanford has been designed from John Hennessy and going forward has made a real difference. And we know within the climate world, multidisciplinary work is necessary. And I think Sarah and Dave really illustrated that because it isn't just technology, it isn't just social movements, it's the combination. So thank you, and it's very exciting. We originally felt that the school would be a signal to others that we need to do more of this at the various universities. We can't have one medical school for the planet. We don't have one medical school for people. So the fact that your universities have gotten you engaged is really critical. And the fact that there are 3,000 students working on the challenge and 91 universities has just really made our hearts sing. So I thank you with that. What I view each of you as is an Olympian for the climate. It's kind of interesting that, of course, this is the Olympics right now, but each and every one of you have shown up, you are passionate, and this is what Olympians do in general. So thank you for that. It's so fun to also know so many are not from the US because there's so much hope in other countries right now about climate and desire to solve climate issues. So we are thrilled that a number of you are not within the United States and have a little bit more freedom maybe to move forward in a wonderful way. I've had a chance to talk to some of you. Crevices in urban spaces, kind of absorbing heavy metals is very cool. Somebody is doing aggregating clean energy projects for finance to support lower cost opportunities in various underserved ways. I've heard about a group that's doing clean wave technology to support folks in Colombia, fishermen in Colombia. And, you know, they had a great story when you talk about, Sarah, how do you motivate people? When you think of a number of people that don't have energy at all, and the fact that they don't have the ability to preserve food, it's really a big deal to think about how much of your time would be devoted to that. So those of us that are energy consumers versus the rest of the world that doesn't have that access, I'm glad to see those kinds of things are happening. So I'm really, really proud of all of that. Thank you. So, you know, we've made a lot of progress. We've gone from what the prediction was of 3.6 degrees of climate of increase in 2100. It's now down to 2.6. We've been able to pick some of the lower hanging fruit, which is appliance and light bulbs changes, some EVs. We've seen solar, wind. We're working on things like nuclear, but we have a long, long way to go. And as Arun mentioned earlier, this is not just your generation, but we've really allowed you to make it your children's generation to work on these problems, sadly, that it is going to be multi-generational. So again, we need everyone in the fight. So we are very, very appreciative for you to step up to the plate. So thank you for all of it. And all I wanted to say was, you guys are heroes. You're truly the Olympians of the next generation. And I think about, I don't have any grandchildren yet. I should look at me, but I have a new puppy. But I want each and every one of you to have the kind of life that John and I have been able to have. And he wrote a book called Speed and Scale, and my colleague, Jonathan Littman, you want to wave your hand there? He has put together something called the Climate Tech Map, and there is a Climate Tech, what's it called? The climatetechmap.com, but he has some flyers here that can show you what are some of the essential things that we feel we need to conquer, and what there are moonshots and what are closer in things. So please see Jonathan to get one of those maps, or for sure get online. So thank you. So I guess now Parul is going to help me to congratulate these wonderful winners. So, thank you. Perfect. Okay, perfect. The good news is I don't have to mispronounce your names.
I get that honor. Okay. All right. So what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna call out some names. We're gonna start with our global finalists in the energy category, and then we'll move into some honorable mentions. We'll then go into our global finalists in the adaptation and resilience category, and along with some special jury nominations as well. So to start out, our first global finalist who will be attending the finals in Munich is, and everybody is here in person, Unipero Energy. So come on up. Congratulations. This is Connor Hoffman, Daniela Fenster, Miles Biley, and Penelagotis Papastosalou. How'd I do? All from Stanford University right here. Congratulations, everyone. All right, let's get a picture with them all out. We can open them up. Woohoo! All right, last hand for Unipero Energy. Thank you guys. Well done and congratulations. Okay. Our second finalist is going to be Amplify Energy. Now, as they're coming on the stage, let me tell you a little about Amplify Energy. This is a platform to aggregate energy across projects in developing countries into investable portfolios for philanthropies, development banks, and private capital. That's Alejandra Valvida, Benji Sazerlecki, and Jinhyung Park from Columbia University. Congratulations, you guys. All right, congratulations, Amplify Energy. Okay, and our final finalist here in the energy category is going to be C to Energy. C to Energy from Puerto Rico. Congratulations. Come on up, you guys. C to Energy is transforming marine pollution and plastics into clean fuels and materials, pioneering circular technologies that unite ocean restoration. This is Angela Cruz Lugo, Diego Gutierrez, Jaylene Luciano, Jeremy Rivera Sanchez, and Omar Torres Rivera from the University of Puerto Rico. Congratulations, you guys. Well done. All right, congratulations, C to Energy, once again. So that sums up our 3 finalists headed to Munich this April, but we have 2 honorable mentions in the energy category that we'd like to round out the day with here. So if I can please get a drum roll again for our first honorable mention. This is Asmi Udaya. Yeah. I believe there are 2 folks from Asmi Udaya here, and the rest of them are online. So Andres and Sebastian are here all the way from Colombia. And ASME is a modular wave energy system. It's providing clean and affordable electricity for communities, enabling local management, reducing CO2 emissions, and improving the quality of life. So congratulations, you guys. Sebastian Suarez and Andres Gome are here with us in person, and Brainer Brasiero, Juanita Baroe, and Luis Pablo Bolaños Pame, as well as Natalia Ordóñez Verdugo, are online. So congratulations, you guys. Once again, let's give a hand to Asme. Congratulations. All right, well done, Asme. Okay, and now our final honorable mention here in the energy category. Last drum roll for the energy category, please. We have Sustain Edge. Sustain Edge is an all-online team with us today, so they won't be joining us on stage, but I'd like to congratulate them anyway. So Sustain Edge is a solar link that empowers small businesses in low-income communities through shared renewable energy via microgrids. By pooling resources, businesses can access clean energy at a lesser cost, reduce emissions, and strengthen local resilience. Now, the Sustain Edge team is a very diverse team from all different parts of the world. We have Al-Hassan Peter Adeyemi from Nigeria, the University of Adaban. We have Cristiano Vitorino. We have Gustavo Osorio and Malcolm Nogueira, all from Brazil, the FATEC Sabre in Brazil. And we have Rajneesh Chaurasia from the Institute of Technology, and Utkarsh Kadewali from the Indian Institute of Science. So congratulations to Sustain Edge, and thank you for joining us online. Okay, we are now going to move over to Adaptation and Resilience. So again, we have 3 global finalists that we'll be naming here that will be headed to Munich this April. All right, for our first global finalist, please give us a drum roll. Electro Ocean. Electro Ocean. Come on up. Electro Ocean presents a novel MCDR solution leveraging in situ seawater electrolysis to durably sequester CO2 as limestone, stimulate shellfish and seagrass growth, rebuild natural shoreline defenses, and restore coastal ecosystems. Congratulations to Faith Keene, Gabrielle Boyd, and Jason Keene from Stanford, Purdue, and UC Berkeley. Congratulations, Electro Ocean. All right, congratulations, Electro Ocean. Moving on to our second finalist in the Adaptation and Resilience category. This is Flood Map. Flood Map, congratulations. Please join us on stage. Flood Map is a network of low-powered, self-sustaining sensors deployed within a localized region to create a system that detects and collects data on flood-related threats. Anna Palacios, Asa Mittal, Lara Rozanski, Rudraksh Mahatra, all from Stanford here. Congratulations, you guys. All right, congratulations to Flood Map. Okay, and our last finalist that we'll be announcing today for the Adaptation and Resilience category, Resilinet. Resilinet. Resilinet connects hospitals during climate disasters to share critical resources like IV fluids and generators. Congratulations to Anushka Bhaskar, thank you, Bhavjane and Shrindi Palakampali from Stanford University. Congratulations, you guys. Resilinet, everyone. All right, let's give one final round of applause to all 6 of our finalists before we have 2 more awards to give out here today. Okay, now we have 2 jury choice awards for the Adaptation and Resilience category here that we're going to be giving out. So, great. I'm going to give out the first one. All right, this is Euteria. So, Birdie Sig with Euteria. What? This is the Community Mobilization Award for Euteria. Euteria is a free knowledge sharing platform that connects climate adaptation and resilience practitioners, enabling them to find collaborators, access proven implementation strategies, and reduce research time from weeks to minutes. Congratulations. All right, now I'm going to welcome Luke Beckman from the Red Cross on stage to give our last award for the day today.
For our panel, we would like to award the Partner Challenge Award. And what this is this is an award where we actually want to link the team up almost immediately in the field. And what we're going to do is with the American Red Cross, we're actually going to link the team up and deploy them with our chief operating officers to see if we can make this happen. So I would like to present to Redshift. And they are online. Yes. Tanay Naik. I get that one. Ashke Modi. And Fateh Binja. So we're really excited to link up with them and see what we can do in the real world as soon as we can to change lives every day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
There they are. Thank you. Well done. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Congratulations, everyone. Let's give one final round of applause for everyone who participated today, everybody who was a winner today, everybody who made some new connections today. Okay, and Parul is going to come back on stage and get us going with the rest of our program. Once again, congratulations to all the winners.
Many, many congratulations. And, as we had shared earlier in the day, really the real prize here is engaging with sustainability and all the hard work that you have done over the last few months. So in many, many ways, everybody is a winner. And I hope that all of you continue this work beyond today, regardless of whether you're a finalist or not. So as the last high note of the program for the day, I would like to invite Stanford's president, Jonathan Levin. So I had the privilege of being at the GSP as a student when he was a dean, and had the opportunity to interact with him several times. And when he took over as the president, one of the things that really stood out to me in his inaugural address was his aspiration to open up the reach of Stanford's education to the world and really reach it widely. And in many ways, that's what we are trying to do here with the Global Sustainability Challenge. So we couldn't have a more fitting leader and speaker to bring the day to a close. So John.
All right, this was incredible, and I'm so pleased to get to be the person to bring this home to a conclusion and wrap up the day. Congratulations to everyone who participated in this event. This was an amazing event, and I found looking at the projects that you all did and the description of them so inspiring. Actually, for a whole bunch of reasons. First, because they were so wide-ranging, and sustainability is such an interesting challenge because as Anne and Arun said a few minutes ago, it is a challenge that requires technological innovation, it requires economic thinking, it requires sort of systemic social thinking, it requires politics, it requires entrepreneurship. It sort of has to bring to bear all of these different ways of coming at problems and problem solving and creativity. And these projects have all of that. Some of them have all of that in one project, but across the project. And it was just so cool to see that, and so cool to see how many universities were involved. And as Prul just said, when we started the Doerr School, the Doerr School opened a little over 3 years ago, it had an incredibly audacious aspiration, which was to be the leading school of sustainability on the planet, but also to help have a more sustainable future for people and the planet. And of course, everyone understood at the time that that was not going to happen just on the Stanford campus, that it would really require trying to partner with and bring in all kinds of other students and universities and organizations. And it is just so cool to see this program has done that and has brought all of you together, and the Red Cross and other universities around the world. So I'm just want to say, first of all, congratulations to everyone who participated in this. Thank you for putting your effort into this important area of sustainability and for participating in this amazing first edition of the Global Sustainability Challenge. You set an example, set the bar high for next year's challenge, whatever it's going to be. That was incredible. And I want to just finish also by thanking our partner universities, in particular, the Technical University of Munich, IIT Bombay, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Zhejiang University, and Imperial College of London. And finally, I want to let's have one more round of applause for Prul and the team that put this whole thing together. And that's it. Congratulations. You can go have some snacks if they're still out there and celebrate your completion of this challenge, at least for those of you who don't have to go to Munich and do the next round.
Wonderful. So before we all disperse, I would just like to say that, a lot of work and effort has gone into making this possible. I've been coming and speaking up on stage, but I'd like to bring all the amazing people who have been involved in this challenge and this initiative in many, many different ways. So first and foremost, any of the judges who were there today, I was really touched by the thoughtful discussion, engagement, the encouraging questions and feedback that went into the deliberation in deciding the awards. So energy and adaptation jury members, please come on stage. I know some had to leave, so we don't have everyone here, but I will be out of the picture. Can we also have one with the winners up on stage with the judges? All the winners who can join? Yeah? And people can stand. You can Yeah.